Welcome, everybody. My name is Doug Reeves, and we're here to talk about getting grading reform unstuck. The reason for this seminar is that grading reform has been around for literally decades, and yet what I've seen over and over again is people who are starting it and then they never finish. They'll start a 5-year plan, discuss, research, learn, and they never implement it. So my job in the time that we have together is to work with you to get grading reform unstuck, and I'll really rely upon your contributions as well. So let me get to the handouts and make a really sincere offer to all of you. And that is that, too often what we see is that one-stop shopping doesn't work. A one-shot professional learning doesn't work. So I literally put my personal phone number on there, and I'm turning it off right now, so nobody to whom I've offered that before is going to interrupt us. But if after this seminar you say, well, Doug, that was great, but you really ought to be talking to our high school math department, you really ought to be talking to our 3rd grade team, please take advantage of that. We don't charge for it. We're happy to help. And we really believe in deep implementation, not just in exposure. That's what this is all about. So let's get to work. Please do not wait until the end for questions or challenges. Interrupt me anytime. If you were in a graduate seminar of mine, I would assign half the room to say Doug is crazy and wrong because, and the other half to say, well, maybe he's not so bad. And I've got a couple of reasons for that. The first is divergent thinking is really great for adult learning. So I want to encourage you also in staff meetings, in professional learning community meetings, in classrooms, to have people basically disagree with each other, even if only assigned, because you'll get better decisions and you'll get better learning when adults disagree. My other ulterior motive is that I think our students need to see adults who can disagree with each other and we're still friends at the end of the day. And they're not seeing nearly enough of that sort of civil discourse and good disagreement among adults. So we've got to model it so our students can do better. Also, please consider representing the people who are not in the room. Grading is a really emotional and sensitive issue. It's emotional for parents, for students, for community members, for board members. And so I want to make sure that even if you happen to agree with something, think of people in your community, in your schools who might disagree and bring their views to the table. I promise a respectful discourse because we need to model that. So I want to give you about a minute right now because there's great wisdom in this virtual room for you to say, where has grading reform failed and maybe where has it succeeded? Because I suspect we have a variety of different experiences. Take 60 seconds, reflect on this, and then I'll reconvene us in 1 minute. See you then. About 10 more seconds, please. And back to large group, please. So who's willing to begin? Tell me where grading reform has failed and where has it perhaps worked for you successfully? And please just unmute yourself when you can contribute.
I think the idea of being standards referenced has brought parents along with the idea of what their children are learning. But the failure is also we haven't solely built the capacity of teachers. It's still so subjective. And if you're on a scale of 1 to 4, what does the 2 versus the 3 mean?
I promise you that we are going to address that because I think you've nailed the essence of the issue. When grades are mysterious, students and parents really object because they remember, their point scale, and they thought that was objective, and standards reference or standards-based grading is inaccurate. I think the other thing that you've so thoughtfully reminded us all of is how we use our terminology. I don't even use the word standards-based grading because it has been so messed up in this country. And any parent who Googles standards-based grading will find examples of how it's been inadequately done. Therefore, what I try to do is just use the word accurate and fair grading, because everybody will be on board with accuracy and fairness. So thanks for that insight. Who's next?
I think one of the failures that we've had is just a high turnover rate in teachers. And so you're trying to build these teams and you're trying to have these conversations about fair and accurate grading, but then you're doing it with long-term subs, or you're doing it with people who aren't going to be in the same position next year. So that's been hard, because you feel like you start moving, gradually in a good direction, and then things get switched up on you. But there has been some progress as far as just small pockets of teachers and just having honest dialogue. Yeah. And a lot of trial and error, to be honest, too, as far as what does fair and what does accurate look like.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that both Paula and Nicole have made a case for clarity and specificity. Teachers in general, but particularly new teachers joining, and there are a raft of new people coming in, they need specificity. And our students need the same thing. The real test of any grading, or rubric for that matter, is not how elegant it is. It's, do kids understand it and can they use it? And I promise I'll address more of those later. Anybody else?
Well, what hasn't worked has been getting teachers to honestly look at students' work when assigning grades. What's an A for one teacher may not be an A for another. So we had tried establishing rubrics by department for grading. And for those that it was a twofer. There were some that were on board with it, some that were not. We're stuck in making sure if a kid has an F, that they stick with the F. So the object, or the chance to redo work, if they fail something, that option, some teachers did it, some didn't. And so there was some success, but mostly failure, because we could not get the bulk of teachers to see the benefit of having students redo work so that they learn it and they get the passing grade.
Well, you've raised two really important issues. The first is consistency, and we're going to talk about that later, because when teachers are inconsistent, students just throw up their hands and say, hey, it's all just a game. One teacher's A is another teacher's F. And the other thing that you raised that I think is so thoughtful and insightful is, as everybody on this seminar is a college-educated professional, for us, the grading system worked. We did our homework. We got things done. But the question that you raise so thoughtfully is, what percentage of our students today are going to become college-educated public school teachers? And I'm thinking it's probably south of 100%. And if it is, we have to give up the association that failure and punishment is going to motivate our kids. If that were really true, if F's and zeros motivated them, then in the year 2023, when this is being broadcast, all of our work should be on time and perfect. And I don't know any teacher on the planet who makes that claim. So thanks for that thoughtful reminder. Well, let's get to work. Why is it in the world that grading reform is so deeply flawed? First of all, there's unnecessary complexity. Thanks to these electronic grading systems that many of you are using, they are crazy. 4, 5, 6-page report cards in 4-point type that nobody reads. Teachers feel disrespected because they're data entry clerks. Parents don't use them. Students don't use them. The complexity is overwhelming. Moreover, because they preload the state standards into those things, it implies that every standard is equal, and that's just not true. They really disrespect teachers as data entry clerks, and they are filled with jargon. I mean, honest to goodness, we have a lot of new arrivals in our country, and I don't know of any of them who know what phonological awareness means. And I don't care if you're an 8th generation, farmer whose home language is English. A lot of those parents don't know what phonological awareness is. We got to give up the jargon. They're ambiguous, as one of your colleagues so thoughtfully said. Who knows what the difference between 4, 3, 2, 1 is? If we're not clear about that, I'm going to offer some ideas for you to consider in a minute. And also, they deny parent concerns. Parents want to know, is this going to help my kid get a scholarship? Is this going to help my kid go to college? Is this going to help my kid in the real world of careers? So we've got to get better about that. And that's one reason why a lot of grading reform has just failed. And of course, students are unprepared for college and work if we don't clean this up. And there's a failure to address the need of high-performing students. One of the raps on grading reforms is that this is just helping struggling kids, but it doesn't help our valedictorian. And I'm going to make the argument that when we do this right, grading reform helps everybody. Because when we do this right, it decreases failures, it adds electives and advanced courses, it improves attendance and behavior. It helps everybody when we get grading reform right. So how do we do it? Here's how we do it. Number one, it'll help every student when we have better discipline, when we have better opportunities for fewer failures, and it will help all of our kids get better. You can see the list of things before you of all the advantages that we have when we get grading reform right. Also, it will result in better respect between students and teachers, as I'll show you in a moment. Now, rule number one of change, talk about what does not change. So I wrote an article along with Ken O'Connor and Leanne Young about stop fighting about minor issues. There's way too much discussion in grade reform. Shall we use numbers? Shall we use letters? It doesn't matter. Just focus on accuracy and fairness. If you want to have letter grades and your community wants that, keep it. There's way too much hot air expelled about the difference between letters and numbers. Let them keep A, B, C, D, F grading if that's what they want. You'll still have GPA. You'll still have transcripts. That's the other thing you'll see on the internet among these parent groups. Oh my goodness, if we have grading reform, our kids can't get scholarships or go to college because they'll lose GPAs and transcripts. No, they won't. You can still have letter grades, GPAs, transcripts. Talk about what does not change. We'll still have academic honors, though I would like to make those academic honors more accurate. Right now, what you have is the valedictorian is 3.99995 and the salutatorian is 3.99994. That's crazy. 1/10,000th of a point to distinguish between who gets $10,000 scholarships and who doesn't. It's way better to do what Harvard and other good schools do, and that is have highest honors, high honors, and honors. And what I saw in a high school graduation last June was remarkable, where the faculty got together and said, wait a minute, GPA is not enough. We have values at the school. We have values, scholarship, that's important, but so is service, so is leadership, so is kindness. I love that because I've never seen a school with a value of kindness. So in other words, if you're a 4.0 jerk, you're not going to be highest honors. And they wanted to make sure that their top students emblazon all of their values as well as high GPAs. And we'll still have meaningful conversations for students who fail and who need to meet the requirements. So let's get to work. Here are some things that I want to get to work on. It's got to be fair, got to be accurate, got to be specific, got to be timely. If you hold a meeting to talk about grading policy, start with values. So let's take each one of these apart. Fairness is all about consistency. That is, in contrast to what your colleague said a minute ago, it's not one teacher's A is another teacher's F. It's rather, do we all agree about consistency? It's about the rules of the game. You know, this is being broadcast in February of 2023. Imagine that in the state finals of the basketball tournaments your kids will go to, that when you show up at the finals, they have a different height of the basket, different shape of the ball, different shape of the court, different number of players in the field. Your kids would go crazy because fairness is all about consistency. And when students think that a game is unfair, what do? They stop playing the game. And here is what has happened in the studies that I've done. When I thought the difference between A's and B's and D's and F's was parent support and knowledge and study and homework, I was completely wrong about that. Because I created this profile with the same parents, the same homework, the same quizzes, the same grades, the same midterms, the same finals, same everything. And what happened? Well, with more than 10,000 teachers could have been an A, could have been a B, could have been a C, could have been a D, could have been an F. Colleagues, that's not fair. That's the very definition of an unfair game. You know, John Hattie, in his wonderful research and his syntheses of meta-analyses, said that one of the great predictors of student success is, can they predict their own grade? And if you cross-examine your children and ask them, how'd you get that grade? The most frequent answer that I get is either, I don't know, or she didn't like me. That's unfair. We have to have consistency, because this chart shows you that the very same kid with the very same performance could have A, B, C, D, or F grades, and that's not fair. So F is for fair, A is for accuracy. Another true confession. You know, I taught math and I tried to be a pretty good math teacher, but 2/3 of my kids were new arrivals to our country. Was I really teaching math, or was I teaching English language literacy with numbers in it? Similarly, a lot of causes for D's and F's today is missing homework. Are we really grading our subject, or are we grading home structure? Are we grading the home family economic cycle? Because, you know, I tell you, for our students, some of them went home to lovely homes with quiet places to work and perfect internet connectivity, and others went home to chaos with many families living in a small place. Mr. Robinson, who I was blessed to have as my principal, said the word homework may or may not have anything to do with the word home. So make sure you have high expectations, but get the work done in class. And the other source of inaccuracy is the 100-point scale. When we have A is 90 and B is 80 and C is 70, D is 60, but the F goes down to 0, we're saying that the difference between A, B, C, and D is 10 points, but the difference between D and F is 60 points. Colleagues, a fourth grader would not make that sort of interval error. It's just plain wrong. And I'll tell you this, I trust you and I trust teachers across the land to tell me the difference between an A and a B and a C and a D. But you want to know what none of them can do? Tell me the difference between a 32 and a 33, a 69 and a 70, or where all the blood is spilled at the end of it every semester, an 89 or a 90. Those are fundamental inaccuracies. You know, there's a reason when you listen to these political polls that they never say candidate X got 72%. They always say 72% plus or minus a margin of error. And that's because every time we have a measurement of any sort, there's a margin of error. But unfortunately in school, you can have a student with an 89.4 who's the B, and the 89.6 who's rounded up to 90 who's an A. That's fundamentally inaccurate and wrong. It's the illusion of precision, and we've got to get rid of it. The other big problem with accuracy is the average. Now, look, you and I have all spent a bunch of money and time on social and emotional learning in the last few years, and we want to have resilience, we want to have perseverance, and we have students who struggled and struggled and struggled and then got better. Struggled and struggled and struggled and then got better. Thanks to you and thanks to your feedback, we ought to be determining their performance at the end of the semester based upon how they finish, not where they started. And yet the average always punishes kids for where they were literally 3 months ago. Remember this guy, Dwight? Dwight from The Office, whose haircut is eerily similar to mine. I want you to imagine that Dwight is the programmer for your electronic grading system. Dwight's not a teacher. Dwight doesn't know anything about education, but he loves that average. Dwight loves punishing kids for what they did 3 months ago. Who do you trust? Who do you trust to evaluate your students, your classroom educators who know them well, who know your state standards, or do you trust Dwight? Every time you let the computer use the average, you're saying Dwight is better, and I don't believe it. I trust our teachers way more than I trust Dwight. So let's think about the S in there. So we've got fair, accurate, specificity. The purpose of grading is to improve teaching and learning. So don't give me some dumb, nice job, smiley face. Tell me exactly what I need to do. Don't just give me a 64%. Tell me how I can improve. Students and frankly, adults need to learn how we can get better and better and better. So I promised you a few minutes ago, I'd help you resolve the issue of what's the difference between A, B, C, and D. I want to use plain and clear language. Colleagues, if your report cards still say that C is average, that's just plain inaccurate. You know, C is awful work. What we need to do is tell our students very clearly from bottom to top what these grades mean. F, you did not try. D, it's not good enough. You need immediate academic support. C, you're getting close. You're almost there. B, you met the standard. And A, you're advanced in rigor and complexity. For those of you using standards reference grading, for example, please do not say that A, or a 4 for that matter, is exceeding standards, because nobody knows what that means. You got to be really specific about what advanced in rigor and complexity means. So let me illustrate with a couple of examples. So I'm going to jump ahead here. Here we go. Let's make an A mean something. A B rather, is you write a persuasive essay with a clear claim, 3 arguments, then some evidence to back up those arguments, appropriate citations, and a good conclusion. That's a B. Oh, you like an A? Please do not talk to me about extra credit. If you want an A, here's what I need you to do. Write a persuasive essay with a claim and a counterclaim. Have 3 arguments and 3 counter arguments, evidence and contrasting evidence, and then evaluate the credibility of the evidence that you have before you and come to a compelling conclusion. That's not more points. That's not more pages. That is rather an increase in rigor and complexity. Let's take a science and math example. You want a B? Great. Here's the data set. Plot the data on the chart and show me the line of best fit. Explain in 3 sentences what the graph means. Oh, you'd like an A? Please don't talk to me about extra points. Please don't ask about extra credit. You want an A? Here's what you got to do. Go back to the drawing board and explain how 2 different scientists or 2 different mathematicians could look at the very same data and draw different conclusions. This is real world stuff, colleagues. Take today's news, for example. Again, this is February of 2023. Nobody knows if we're going into a recession or not, but you have 2 different economists looking at the very same economic data, and one says we're going into a recession, and the other one says, no, we're not. Explain how 2 different people could look at the same data. Same thing with climate change. This is not a political issue. It's a real world issue where people have the very same climate data for 200 years. Explain how one says global warming is real and the other says global warming is not. That's real world stuff, higher in rigor and complexity. So what we have to do is to move from points to performance. Make an A mean something. And interestingly, when grading reform has been implemented with 2 simple things, like moving practice into class and not using the average, it not only lowers the DF rate, but as I just described to you, A's are hard. And you'll have some students who used to be able to make A's with extra credit. And now you're saying you actually got to do real work. And when they say, well, that's a lot of work, great, settle for a B. An A ought to mean something. Grading reform is not easy. Grading reform makes A's mean something and helps our students prepare for the real world of college and the job. So part of what we need to do is move from points to performance. And that is how I think our experience can really help us here. If you start a conversation with your colleagues, don't say we're going to talk about grading policy because everybody's all freaked out about that. Instead, ask them to say, what's the very best feedback that you've ever had? I promise you, when you ask your colleagues to talk about feedback, they'll talk about fairness and accuracy, specificity, and then the T is timely. You know, colleagues are enraged, and rightfully so, when the suits come into the back of the room, look at a classroom, and then crickets. Nothing happens. I promise you, if I'm ever lucky enough to be in one of your schools, the sun will not set if I do a classroom observation without immediately offering the opportunity for teachers to hear their point of view about what they saw in the classroom, and I'll share what I saw as well. So fair, accurate, specific, and timely, that's what we have to do. So here's all it takes for effective grading reform. It requires return to the ABCDF model. You don't have to give up letters. A lot of people are invested in those, and I think grading reform has failed when we have tried to supply words or numbers rather than ABCDF with which people are most comfortable. And use it the way we've been doing it literally for hundreds of years. A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. And I emphasize this because, look, it's my fault. I'm the guy who wrote the most quoted article on this particular issue, the case against the 0. It's 18 years old, and I still get hate mail about this. My goodness, you know, I meant no offense. I should have said the case against the inaccurate zero, because it's the zero on the 100-point scale that is faulty. But if teachers are deeply invested, as you suggested so thoughtfully a few minutes ago, in giving zeros, fine. Just make it an accurate zero. When A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0, you can give a 0, but it's not the death penalty. So you can go back to the old-fashioned system. You'll avoid a ton of fights that way, particularly if you also get rid of the average. Then we need to grade students on the basis of their performance. Colleagues, standards among the 50 states in the US, and I'm one of the few people who have read all of them, have been based on student performance against standards for more than 20 years now. But still, people persist in using the average. That's not what state law says. Now, I know in many of your jurisdictions, teachers are empowered to award grades, but they're not empowered to award inaccurate grades. And so the accurate grade is how they finish the race, not how they started. I want you to imagine this. Your track champion is on the pedestal, getting ready to win her gold medal for running a 4-minute mile this coming spring. And just as the gold medal is about to be clasped around her neck, somebody sneaks up and says, wait a minute, you made a lot of mistakes in practice in February. We're going to take away that gold medal. Now, in that context, that's crazy talk. You would never allow that. But that is precisely what happens every single end of semester when a student who has maybe made a 4 or a 5 on an AP exam, who has aced the final or at least gotten a B, gets a D or an F because of missing work from 3 months ago. We have to stop that. So get rid of the average. Don't allow people to penalize students for mistakes of the past. And finally, practice in class. The leading cause of D's and F's is missing work. And yet, if we would simply have the practice done in class, as a growing number of high school math and science teachers are doing, then we would avoid that problem. So here's the accurate way to evaluate students. Never use the average. Always assess their proficiency against the state standard. It's the way that we evaluate, by the way, drivers, pilots, brain surgeons. I used to be a pilot. You want me to make a bunch of mistakes on the ground where I'm not going to hurt anybody. And when I finally get my license and I'm up in the air with an FAA inspector, we want to have an equal number of takeoffs and landings. Make all the mistakes you want, make them where they're not going to hurt anybody, make them where you can learn from them. And then when you're up in the air, you have safe flight and safe landing. The same is true with respect to algebra, history, science. Let us make mistakes early and then get feedback on those mistakes, and then we can finish successfully. This get it right the first time myth is simply wrong. Getting it right the first time means they didn't learn anything. What we want them to do is to make mistakes. That's what we want in every endeavor, and not punish those mistakes, but rather reward the learning from those mistakes. So what do we do if students refuse to work? Here's the last thing I'll say. I know that what we've been trying for the last several years, and I'm indebted, by the way, to Dr. Stuart Ablon of Harvard Medical School faculty in this wonderful book, Changeable. I really recommend it to you, who says, we've been trying punishment and rewards for 400 years in schools. It's not working. Point deductions. If you turn this in late, you'll have 10 points off. F's, zeros. You know what? We do that because all of us didn't like point deductions, F's and zeros. We were scared to death. And yet, the truth is today's students are not. So if F's, zeros, and point deductions worked, all the work ought to be perfect and on time. I don't know of anybody who says that. So here in conclusion are things that I'm going to offer you. Catch-up Fridays. These are all things, by the way, that I did not invent. I just learned from people like you. I learned from classroom educators and school administrators. Every week, Catch-up Fridays. This is a school, to give you a sense of scale, of about 1,100 kids. They had 385 failures, almost all due to missing work. And so they said, between Monday and Thursday, that's between you and the teacher. If it's not squared away by Friday morning, you're going to go to the catch-up room. Now, I know all the arguments against that. Well, we're suborning bad behavior. They're missing Friday morning instruction. Colleagues, when they had 385 Fs, they were missing Friday instruction anyway. What happened? They went from 385 Fs to 15. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's pretty darn good. And as I said earlier, when you reduce failures, they had 55% reduction in suspensions. They had better behavior, better classroom climate and culture, better attendance, Try it. Catch up Fridays. Remember, not Saturday school, not summer school, not after school. They got it done during the school day. How about daily academic support? The evidence, thanks Johns Hopkins, by the way, for this, is that we have spent millions and millions of dollars on after school, Saturday school, summer school that is not working. What works is explicit during the day support. I know a middle school, for example, in California, that every single day, if your homework's not done, you're having lunch in a separate room to get your work done. It's not real fancy, but it sure does work. Early final exams, we're so oftentimes focused on punishment rather than reward. You want to know what our adolescents value is? Freedom, independence. So here's a school where their lowest pass rate was 9th grade science, 36% of kids passing. What was the F's, zeros, punishment? That wasn't working. Here's what they said. Students, if you pass your early final exam, we'll schedule one 3 weeks early, then you're going to be have some weeks of freedom. Now you can't leave campus. We'll figure out things for you to do. They had rope climbs and makeup days and movie days and that sort of thing. But you finish early, get an A or a B on the test, then you'll have some freedom. What happened? 2 things. Number one, they went from 36% to 69% to 92%. Same kids, same finals, same teachers. They just had the right incentive down. And also, after this wonderful principal who I deeply respect had a legal, he was an old-time guy, wrote everything on a legal pad with rope climbs and makeup days, movie days. What did these students do who finished early? They stayed in class and tutored their colleagues who could get better and better and better, focusing on the things that they needed. And for teachers, the least stressful final exam season they had ever had. So I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas, but I hope you'd consider it. They had backpack reviews. This is another school. This was a bigger school, about 1,700 kids. And basically every week they just published the green, yellow, red list. Green is all your work is squared away. Yellow, you're missing a few assignments. Red, you're in danger of missing class. So here's what Monday looks like. Good morning, young lady. Really happy to see you here. Appreciate you being here on time. And by the way, young lady, you're on our yellow list. I need to see your backpack. You can't see my, yeah, actually I can. I can see anybody's backpack because it's a safety issue in our school. And I just want to make sure you're prepared to come to class. I want to make sure that you got your books and your pens and your papers. And hey, it looks like you're all squared away. Have a great week. It's pizza day. We always believe in unhealthy food here. So have a good one. Oh, young man, you're on my red list. I need to see everything. Dump it all out because I also want to see your assignment notebook. You guys, yes, I can. It's a safety issue. I can see anybody's backpack. They hate that. Now, how badly do they hate that? Badly enough so that in the school of 1,700 kids, they had 180 fewer failures in one semester. Now, I want you to think about that. If you've got an average class size of 30, 180 fewer failures is 6 fewer repeaters, 6 more electives. And that is what I'm seeing around the country. So colleagues, I'm sure you got better ideas than I do, but honest to goodness, we can do better than this. And we've got to really make these ideas work. So I want to stop there and give you an opportunity for any final questions and challenges. I've tried to give you simple ideas that you can implement immediately, not a 5-year plan, not a 20-page grading policy. Just stop using the average and get homework done in school, not at home. If you'll do those 2 things and go back to old-fashioned ABCDF grading, 43210, you'll avoid a bunch of fights, and you will also improve dramatically discipline, behavior, and you'll improve student passing rates. So it's your turn. Any final questions or challenges that you'd like to make? Just unmute yourself and charge ahead, please.
Can you just point us to the article that you spoke about with the zero, non-zero?
I will. It's called The Case Against the Zero.
Okay.
It's all over the internet. If you just Google that, you'll find it.
Thank you so much.
Not at all. And I'm also we're going to send to all of you some other articles and tools that I've written, including teacher observation rubrics and administrator rubrics that may be useful to you. They're all free and open source, so please take advantage of those. Well, so before we close, I just want to say a couple of words of thanks. This has been a rough few years for all of you. And as a parent, as a colleague, as a citizen, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you're still in our schools, that you're still serving schools. We lost a lot of people in the last 3 years, and I am deeply indebted to you and never want to miss the opportunity to express my sincere appreciation for all of you.
I don't know if it's I don't know how to make it a clear question, but like the getting rid of the average, like theoretically, I understand it. I'm not sure how to approach it with teachers, especially a teacher who gives, 25 assignments, and then she wants an easy way to, excuse me, assess them in the end. But and it almost goes back to, I don't know if all of our assignments are equal, and I don't know if our assignments, are measuring the right standards. And so how do you decide without averaging? How do you decide what the student's grade is? And I understand, like, if they're doing better towards the end, but they didn't do the stuff at the beginning at all, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to approach it with a teacher.
I think there's a couple of ways of approaching that. And number one is every electronic grading system I know allows the teacher to identify the weight of each assignment. So you can put it in there. So parents have visibility. At high school, this is important for like athletic eligibility. So you can put it in there, but you don't have to put it in as calculating the final grade. And if you don't mind, let me just ask you, what program do your teachers use?
We just have Infinite Campus.
Okay, great. That's a good example. So there's an opportunity to check or uncheck every assignment. So you can
Right.
put all the evidence in there, but you don't have to check it for calculation of the final grade. What I see Infinite Campus also does is allow every teacher to override the calculation. So you can show the calculation during the semester for athletic eligibility and so on, but the teacher has the authority to determine the final grade. And the final grade ought to be based on performance at the time the grade is awarded, not the average. That's just plain the most accurate way to do things.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I guess I would just like to thank you for all the opportunities you have afforded so many of us from the pandemic until the present that have been free and accessible. I just appreciate this free access. Thank you so much.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. And I speak for all of my colleagues as well. There's 55 of us at Creative Leadership, and we are all deeply committed to not only our own children, but the children that all of you serve as well. Well, colleagues, I know it's late in some of your time zones. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, we will send you the handouts that I just published. That includes my serious personal phone numbers. So I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but it's like the guy on TV. I've seen a thing or two. So if you or your colleagues have questions, I hope you'll take us up on that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.